Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm Pam Jones with Central Analysis Bureau, and this is Chad Krieger, also with Central Analysis Bureau, and we are going to talk about motor carrier data.
Who wants to learn about motor carrier data? Isn't that a fun subject? We're here to help make it fun.
All right, so we come from Central Analysis Bureau, as I said. We started back in the ICC days as a conduit for motor carriers to share their financials with the insurance companies when they worked to determine what the pricing would be for those motor carriers' insurance. So you may be familiar with some of our sister companies. What we've done is merged our data and multiple data companies with our media companies, and we are now Fusible. You may have heard of Randall Riley. That is our parent company.
Fusible is, interestingly enough, there's all of these different products that we've got here. CCJ and Overdrive, many of you may be familiar with Overdrive, used to be a print periodical. CCJ has got all kinds of great industry articles in there. And our name Fusible, because we're all fused together, right? We're spelling Fusible wrong, but that's our new name out there. So as far as our people, again, we're from Central Analysis Bureau and Fusible. We have industry experience in all kinds of different areas. Both Pam and I, at one point early in our careers, were safety directors at motor carriers. So we've got all the fun experience of driver qualification files, log books, all those good things, communicating with the insurance companies, helping them understand what vehicles that we've got and what vehicles that we've moved on from. But ultimately, we're in the partnership. And the clients that we serve is ultimately, 2 out of 5 top 30 motor carriers we work with, more than half of the top 30 insurance brokers, and then also we work with, I'm just using my bifocals for the first time in something like this, I'm trying to make sure I'm looking at it correctly, and then 100% of the top 30 insurance carriers that focus on motor carriers out there.
So what do we look like today? If we just go in and look at the last 10 years, for example, 2023, just as you can see, it's a little shaded because that data is not 100% complete, even though it is the end of March. But on the top, you can see that motor carrier crash events in the thousands had gone up pre-pandemic, dropped obviously during the pandemic, but since then, we're at higher levels than what we were pre-pandemic. Again, that's going to be motor carrier crash events. And then separately from a liability standpoint, when you look at the number of crashes with bodily injuries, again, you can see we're relatively where we were pre-pandemic.
So it's always interesting when you look at this information, and I think for the rest of our lives, we'll have that pandemic year, right, where everything was kind of dropped down. But, we really kind of got back at it. We didn't skip a beat very much there, and then we kind of continued on with our growth. And as Pam mentioned, the 2023 year, similar to your claims out there, or your crash claims or work comp claims, things like that, they're a little bit green at this point. There's still information coming in. Generally, the information is very quick in coming in, but there are some things out there that take a little bit of time to come through the system. Moving on to, again, the problem and the data. One of the things that we're seeing out there, and you've probably seen many articles or gone to many conferences to talk about these things, that's social inflation. I mean, we're all kind of in the same boat. Everything is more expensive. I heard, I was watching the news this morning, and they were talking about a person who owned a restaurant, and eggs are 3 times as much as they were just a couple of years ago. So when we're looking at these kind of things, it affects all of us. Look at your own homeowner's insurance, right? Costs are going up. And when we look at this information, the number of cases with verdicts over $1 million in the 2005 to 2011 was basically, just under 80 at 79. But in the last number of years, 2012 to 2019, we're looking at over 265 of those things out there. Similarly with the average verdict size, it's growing dramatically as well too. Back in 2010, the average verdict size was 2.3 million. And in the last data that we've got, it's actually 22.3 million. So it's quite a jump there. And again, we're seeing that all across the board. And again, in response, when we're looking at the information we talked about earlier, we work with a lot of insurance carriers out there. It's kind of our core customer base. We also work on the agency side of things and with motor carriers to help the motor carriers understand their own data. This is kind of what we're seeing with those costs for insuring our fleets out there. This is the number, the percent increase by month for the cost of that insurance out there. And as you can see, June of 2023, we went from 8.3% to 10.4%. So you can actually add these things up over time, and it's just becoming more and more expensive. And again, it goes back to some of this social side of things. Vehicles are more expensive, injuries are more expensive. I've actually got a pinched nerve in my neck. I've been going to physical therapy to try to work through that type of a thing. That's the more expensive out there. It's kind of hitting us from all sides.
So if we look at the FMCSA activity, so this is the inspection activity. And it's interesting, kind of like the rest of economy, you don't have as many workers as we had in the past. So there are not as many inspections that are happening roadside as we had prior to 2020. So you can see we're headed back up, but we're not where we were prior to.
And again, whether if you're a driver in here or a fleet owner, it may not feel like you're being inspected less. But there is, the data does bear out that there's actually fewer inspections out there than there was pre-pandemic.
And then looking at the crash events with one or more bodily injuries reported. Now here you can see that we are down from where we were at, but not by much. Just 3% from 2014 down to 2022. So the exposures and our driving crashes up, but the good thing is that we believe the technology that many companies motor carriers have implemented, they spent some money, made some investments, and that's helping reduce the severity of the crashes that are happening.
So we are seeing a lowering of that, but again, those bodily injuries reported, even though we're seeing fewer of those incidents are becoming more expensive, and you're probably seeing that with your liability insurance out there. And as far as accident frequency is concerned, when we're looking within the inspection data, we observe a clear predictive and actionable insights. And again, the information that we're able to provide to the industry there's a lot of information that can be garnered from that. And again, it's not just basic scores, it's not just different things like that. But there are insurance companies out there and organizations, risk companies that are looking at specific types of violations and behaviors that they see in their own data that contribute to losses or contribute to claims. And that's where we start to see that rise out there. So when you look at this type of the out of service violations are a big indicator. So the out of service violations, not just any violation, but the out of service violations that basically park the vehicle until we get it resolved. We see a clear indicator that when there's out of service violations, we've also got injury accidents out there. So that accident frequency and severity rise with out of service outcomes. So if you're looking at something to pay attention to with your own fleets and things like that, paying attention to those out of service violations can be an indicator to identify ways to reduce those types of exposures.
And then looking at, as we said, with the out of services, you can see percent of inspections with out of services, we've really jumped up here from post-pandemic. So not just they are doing fewer inspections, but the inspections that they're doing, they are having violations that are more severe because they are being placed out of service.
As we look at the information as well, the trends in specifically driver violations, similar to out of service, the rate of driver violations are also rising in the inspection data, providing for a second clear opportunity for intervention. So those inspections that have driver violations, along with those out of service violations as well, we're starting to see a rise with that. Again, we're seeing a little bit of a downtick in 2023, but again, that data is still a little bit green. It's still coming in. So from 2014, we've got kind of a valley going down, and then we're ticking back up here. So paying attention to those types of driver violations and out of service violations are going to be key to your overall data and the health of your organization. Boy, that really makes it dark, doesn't it?
So let's talk a little bit about FMCSA data and some updates. So hopefully you've all heard by now that FMCSA has proposed to change our compliance, safety, and accountability program that utilizes the SMS system, the safety management system. Today, the way the program is set up, we've got 7 different basics. You've got the ISS system, which is a nice snapshot with a recommendation to the inspector on whether or not they should inspect, consider it, or let the truck go by. You've also got the data that brings in where the motor carrier is at if they've had an audit, And then we've also have out of service information. So the nice thing is the agency shares with, you can see the vehicle, the driver, and the hazmat, so you can get a real flavor for how that motor carrier is doing. And the insurance companies are utilizing this information. My loss control peeps out there, they look at this information all the time so that they're figuring out ways to help that motor carrier improve their processes based on their information.
One of the things I always like to point out when we're talking about these things, we have the opportunity, the great opportunity to talk to a lot of motor carriers out there, small, large, medium, all kinds of different organizations out there. They generally hear about CAB or our organization, Central Analysis Bureau, through their insurance agent or maybe their insurance carrier. But ultimately, we have a lot of those folks that are reaching out to us and asking questions about the information that we're providing to the industry. We provide it to the insurance world. We aggregate the data for agencies and things like that. But basically, any organization that needs to understand or evaluate risk is paying attention to this information, whether they're getting it from us or somebody else. So as an organization-wide consideration, I continue to be surprised of the motor carriers that reach out to us. We actually have a booth here. We come by and visit us. We can actually look up your information if you want. But people that come to us and they visit us, and we basically ask them, have you looked up your own safety measurement system information? Have you looked up your own basic scores? Or we've got the new system is coming out. You can actually see what the new system is going to look like as far as these scores are concerned. And it's very surprising how many companies have never looked it up, don't know how to look up their information, and what occurs is they start to run a temperature. They start to have alerts, whether it be in the vehicle inspections, violations, driver safety, whatever it might be, and they don't realize it's a problem until their insurance company drops them, or their insurance company says, hey, we're gonna have to really jack your rates even more than the standard rate increases and things like that. So there are lots of companies looking at this information, truck leasing companies, truck rental companies, paying attention to it. We had a lot of an influx of risk-type companies looking at this information right around the pandemic time because there was a limited number of units available out there for them to lease and rent. So they wanted to understand that motor carrier to determine, get their history. What are their basic scores look like? What type of violations or crashes do they have out there? So that they can determine, well, do I want to give my brand new truck to these guys, or should I give it to somebody else, especially when there's limited information out there. So very much, whether you do this through us or another organization, it's so important to pay attention to this information because it's not just the insurance carriers. That's kind of where we got our start, was working with the insurance carriers. But so many freight factoring companies are looking at this information, and they're using this as a way to understand or to take a temperature of a motor carrier and their overall safety of their organization, which can bleed into lots of different areas of their business.
All right. So we just had that last session, if you were in the same room, where FMCSA talked about some changes on the registration process. One of the things that they didn't talk about changing is the biennial update. Every motor carrier is required by law to update your information with the federal government at least every 2 years. It's based on your DOT number. The last digit of your DOT number tells you the month. The second to last digit tells you whether you do it in even or odd years. Now you can do it more frequently than that, but that's the bare minimum of when you do need to do it. And what's interesting is first of all, they look at the UCR on there. So they go in, the inspectors, especially in the first quarter, they'll go in and make sure, did the motor carrier pay their UCR, and does it match the fleet count on their 150? It comes up during your DOT audits with the auditors. Now, if you give updated information to the auditors, that isn't going to end up on the system. You still need to go in and update the information on the system, even if you did give that to the auditors. But it gets tied into your CSA evaluation, and then shippers are looking at it, and other parties, as Chad had said. So the example up here where the DOT number ends in 456, 6 is the last digit, so the motor carrier would be required to fill it in by the end of June, and the last digit is 5, so by the end of June in odd years. Needs to be done then. In the past, what used to happen is if it didn't get done, FMCSA would send you this nice little letter that said, oh, hey, you may have overmissed this. just go ahead and do it now. Now, if you go to the next slide, they flip to the complete opposite side of the spectrum, and now if you don't update it, your operating status can be listed as inactive. And then you're gonna find that out in most cases when your truck is on the side of the road and they're not gonna be allowed to move. So, and right up here, you can see the annual update of MCS 150 data not completed. Now, I don't see this very often, but it has come up a few times in my career where we've had to help the motor carrier out.
We ingest basically all of the data from the roadside inspections and things like that. So we are seeing more and more of that. But going back just a little bit here, it's so important to make sure that you're updating this information because, again, some of the data outputs take these things into account, like your vehicle count, your miles traveled. The crash basic and the unsafe driving basic take those two data points into account. So if you're part of an organization or you're getting, and I love the trucking industry because we can have folks that start out kind of by themselves, and in a matter of time, they start to find customers that love them. The customers want to put more freight with them. They're hiring their relatives, friends, people out on the road. And they can get up to, 10, 15, 20 units relatively quickly. And if you're not paying attention to this information, if you get into a growth mode and you're still telling the industry that you've got 1 unit or 2 units and you're really rolling with 15, 20 units, that can really start to skew the data. You're required to update it every 2 years, as Pam mentioned, with the biannual update based on the last 2 digits of your DOT number, but you can update it as often as you want. If you're in the middle of your 2 years and you add on a couple of units, go ahead and update that because that can affect the data that's coming out and that people are looking at. Other things here, again, sources for the aggregated safety data. Again, we are Central Analysis Bureau, also known as Fusible, with our new name there. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, the CSA information, they're taking a look at that stuff. And again, the insurance carrier risk assessment. The insurance costs for an organization are pretty high. I mean, obviously you've got equipment costs, you've got labor costs, but let me tell you, my homeowner's insurance has gone crazy. It might have something to do with it. I have 3 boy drivers out there, but that could affect that as well too. But they're looking at that and they're using that information for their loss control people, their underwriters, when they come out and visit you to talk to you, they're looking at this information because their motivation is, hey, you're on our policy. We underwrote your organization. We want to be, when we wrote you, we felt that you were a good organization, so that's why we put you on the books and that's why we issued a policy for you. Their goal is to help you stay viable, to stay safe, so that they can continue to provide your insurance. But if we're not paying attention to the data, it's an important thing. And when we talk about just different pieces of the data, for those of us that have gone through a DOT inspection, right? You get to go through the inspection, they give you a piece of paper. It's very important, whether you're a business owner or a leader within the organization, that those inspections are being turned in so you're aware of that information, and so that you're aware and you can act on that information. Because if we don't pay attention to it, we're not monitoring the information, going back to those basic scores and things like that out there, we can really start to run into trouble where different organizations are looking at that information. And not only that side of things, we had a slide earlier that showed the stoplights, right? The stoplights out there. You start to run a temperature as an organization, you're going to see yourself getting inspected more often. That slows you down. That exposes you to additional violations, out of services and things like that. And basically all of those roadside inspections that your organization goes through feeds into the system, and that's what they're using to determine who they're going to inspect and what they're going to pay attention to. Again, comprehensive vehicle and driver data collection for those inspections, and then a safety data sources for informed decision support. Again, that informed decision support is being used by the industry. A number of third-party providers, clients that you work with, organizations that you work with are paying attention to that information and can determine, are we going to place a load with this organization or not? Other things to keep in mind with the underwriting side of things, the insurance risk assessment, which again, because that's such a big part of the costs for your organization, is an educated guess based on available information. Key there is available information, and we talked about it a little bit ago, is making sure that your information is as updated as possible so that they're looking at the best information. Predictive analytics are a critical component of designing underwriting standards. Organizations, insurance companies, they all have their own information that they're interested in. They all have their own data that they evaluate, and they all look at things a little bit differently. Like I said, we work with a lot of different insurance carriers out there, and nobody underwrites the same. They're all looking at different data points. So pay attention to those kind of things. On the risk assessment side of things, it's more than just your crashes and the basic scores. A lot of the organizations that we work with, they are digging deep into specific types of violations to understand the risk of this organization. When I say risk, I mean the exposure of the organization. We have that information, we provide that information, but all of these different insurance companies have their own history, sometimes hundreds of years of data that they're evaluating to understand what they're looking for. And some of the nuanced violations that we hear about in our discussions with our clients, which I wouldn't think, even having been in the insurance industry, that I wouldn't think were a big deal, but they have direct correlation to the safety or the exposure or the crashes of a motor carrier, depending on the type of violation that they see out there. And again, that better data allows for more refined analytics. Think about it, you want to have the best input possible, right? You want to have the best information available to that insurance carrier, to that entity, so that you are being set up and evaluated appropriately, right? You want to make sure that that information is available. And then the visibility, it allows for better risk mitigation. Understanding that company, when an insurance carrier or insurance agencies are a huge piece of this. For those of you that maybe are business owners, make sure you're working with an agency or a broker that understands transportation and understands trucking, because they are one of your biggest advocates to the insurance carriers, to the insurance industry out there, because they can help and do that communication with the underwriter to make sure that they understand what happened in that claim or in that particular situation. And again, database risk assessment principles apply to most aspects of the trucking industry. It's not just the insurance, but it also is factoring, freight brokerage, equipment sales, rental, leasing, and recruiting. Interesting that some of the drivers that talk about, they look up the safety. They're interested in understanding what the safety of the organization is, because they understand if that motor carrier has got a red for the inspection selection system, the stoplight, they're going to be stopped more often. They're going to be able to get less miles. It's going to put them behind, so that's something that they definitely pay attention to.
All right, so those targeted interventions and the crash reduction is data that FMCSA makes available. The insurance group utilizes your claim information. It looks at your exposures. If you take all of that in, as Chad said, it's not just the insurance piece that we need to look at, the compliance piece that you need to look at, but it all affects how profitable you are. And we've got other entities, it's your shippers, as we said, that are looking at this information. Nuclear verdicts, though, are, it's amazing the information that those folks are finding when they are trying to up the dollars on those claims. I shouldn't say claims, but on those verdicts. And then, like you said, driver retention piece. So it's not just drivers that are looking for new motor carriers, but it's your existing drivers. Are you able to keep the people that you have based on how the fleet is performing?
And that profitability portion, I mean, that's so key. You're all, I shouldn't say everybody in here, but if you're a motor carrier out there, you're operating a business, and every additional dollar that your insurance costs you out there, it goes right to the bottom line. So making sure that information is as accurate as possible. And not only is it accurate, but as you're seeing different things coming through or violations coming through, or even if you're the driver, make sure that we get those things addressed so that we don't start to see that come through more often. Because again, that can, whether you're a single unit fleet, all the way up to hundreds or thousands of units, those are things that people are paying attention to out there when they're looking at understanding the exposures of a motor carrier.
All right, so those drivers and motor carriers in the room, you're probably very familiar with the International Road Check. Happens every May, 72 hours. Inspectors across Canada, the United States, and Mexico just start doing inspections. Not that they don't do inspections all the time, but they focus those 3 days. And every year there's a special emphasis that they pay attention to. This year there is the tractor protection valve, and then also some alcohol and controlled substance possession. The QR code that I have up there is a bulletin directly from CVSA, Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance, which is the group of law enforcement officers that work with the industry across the 3 countries to make sure that there's at least work towards uniformity in the inspection process. But they created a bulletin that talks about the tractor protection system, because I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to talk to you about that. But in addition to that piece, there is also the drug and alcohol possession. We can see through data from the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse, we're at 68,000 68,000 drivers that are in not prohibited or are in prohibited status, and it's telling us that, and it's been going up and up. So there are definitely drivers that are utilizing drugs and alcohol, nefarious activity products while they're out on the road. So we need to curb that because we all want to have fewer crashes on the road because it's all our families out there. So May 14th through the 16th, every scale house anywhere near you, as well as all of the portable units that are available across the different states.
All right, real brief CSA updates here.
So FMCSA, as I said earlier, they are working towards moving to a new CSA product. They are going to change it. I'm going to get on the next slide, talk about that. Some things are changing, some things are staying the same, but they've said we need more fairness, more accuracy, more clarity in the data, and to get towards their goal of 0 crashes. CSA is interesting. You want to jump to the next slide for me? So you've got the slide. I'm not going to read all of it to you, but we will still have 7 categories. However, they're going to be different. They're going to take the controlled substance, basic, and move it into unsafe driving. They are going to split vehicle maintenance into 2. One of them will be driver observed. The other one will be vehicle maintenance, and that's more things that the shop normally is going to find. Reorganizing some of the violations. You can see 116 different violation groups. It will be narrowed to severity weight. So right now the severity weight goes 1 to 10, with 10 being the worst. They want to change this to 1 to 2. I know that this was a heavily commented on period, and if you want, you can definitely get the comment period closed, but you can go out and look at the comments that people have published on this, and that was part of the rulemaking process. It's all out there. But it has not been, they're in phase 2 of a multi-phase process, and they being the agency. So they haven't 100% identified what's going to stay, what's going to go from their proposal. I'm really hoping that 1, 2 thing, maybe 10 is too many, but I don't think 2 is enough. When you dig into that, it's just not, it doesn't make sense to me. But you can also see intervention thresholds are going to change a little bit. They're going to modify the utilization factor, which is where they look at how many vehicles, how many miles are you operating, and then also segmenting the breakdown. So the driver fitness category is going to be similar to how unsafe driving and crashes are, where they're going to consider the motor carrier, whether they're straight truck fleet or a combination fleet. So that's going to be a new piece added there. And then also on hazmat, they're going to break it up from a standpoint of, are you a cargo tank carrier versus a non-cargo tank carrier in that hazmat space. And then the nice thing is they're also bringing in the non-preventabilities. I mean, they have started to do that already, but they're going to remain that focus on those non-preventable crashes, which we're going to talk about a little bit more coming up here.
And this data is the kind of the ingestion point, the roadside inspections, but this is the information that goes into that history of those crashes and inspections. So it is very important. And a lot of times when companies are small, they don't pay attention to this until all of a sudden it's a problem. But I very much encourage you, and we want to get this information out to folks, but Google CSA, understand what it means. Some of the folks pay attention to this information. They feel, well, if the violation, it'll go against the company. I mean, if you're the company, that's a problem, of course. But ultimately, those are things that we want to pay attention to before they become problems. And these changes are important. Whether you're a company driver or an owner-operator, the pre-employment screening program, the PSP, this information goes on your, for lack of a better term, DOT records. So if you're looking at, changing organizations or putting your vehicle under another company's DOT or authority or something like that, those are all pieces that they can look at and they'll see that information. So it's important to make sure that we're understanding and addressing these things.
And as I said, we are in phase, the agency is in phase 2 there. They have not told us when, just someday it'll know.
My favorite line from the FMCSA is "in the coming months." When will this be implemented? In the coming months, which could be tomorrow or the end of time. But they're definitely active for sure and looking at making a number of improvements, as we saw in the prior presentation, which I thought was very, very good. There is definitely, and being a company that deals with the data output that the FMCSA provides, they could definitely use some updates, and we're excited about that. So as far as the industry is concerned, we just got a few, again, there's a very small print down here, but this is the industry as a whole based on a number of the different basics categories. Some of the things that we can see here, these are the basic scores. It's 0, or it's at 1 to 100. Depending on what you're hauling, 80 percentile could be an alert, 65 could be an alert, or whatever it might be. But one of the things to point out here is that the highest percentiles are generally in those smaller organizations, okay? You're much more susceptible to kind of swings because of the data that's coming in for if you've got 1 or 2 units and you've got a couple of bad inspections or rough inspections where there's a number of violations, it can really throw these numbers around. So it's even more important to make sure that your vehicle is well maintained and being inspected. Unsafe driving is a big key with that, making sure that we're not speeding more than we need to and things like that. And again, you can kind of look across the board. The smaller the organization, the higher you see those scores. So make sure to pay attention to those things.
So FMCSA talked about enhancements that they made, and like many companies out there, they have implemented security measures. In the last session, the gentleman referenced to it, the login.gov. So as a motor carrier, prior to December 21st of last year, you were able to utilize your PIN number to go in and see the private information for your individual fleet. Once December 21st happened, the login.gov site went live for the SMS information. So now in order to get in, you have to enter in your credentials, and then you can now get to that same private information that you were using before. It's a good process. It makes sense. It came out of a presidential declaration that all of the agencies needed to get up to the times with cybersecurity enforcement. However, I will tell you, we get a lot of calls all the time that motor carriers are having problems getting into their information. So pay attention. You need to utilize, if you don't already have one, you're going to have to create a login.gov. However, it's the same login.gov credential that motor carriers created a few years back when they implemented the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse. So it's not anything new. If you've got that already built, you can use the same one for this. But this is the new means to get in and get your private information with the government.
And one of the things that makes me nervous, again, login.gov is great. Multi-factor authentication is something that we should all support. We definitely want our data to be protected, which is fantastic. The issue that we run into is, again, some of the smaller organizations out there, like I mentioned earlier, we get to talk to them all the time, and they weren't looking at their information when it was easy to look at the information, and now it's a little bit tougher. There's a couple of steps that we got to take to make sure that we're authenticating properly, which again is a good thing. It's what we want, but it's very important that we get set up with login.gov so that you can look at that information, whether you're working with an organization like Central Analysis Bureau with our Motor Carrier Advantage or another organization that can help you understand and aggregate the data. You need to get that registered so that can be ingested by those organizations to really give you a good understanding as to how you're sitting and how you're being viewed by the industry out there.
All right, so now some more data. So this is going to be inspections per 100 power units, and you can just see that when you're in green alert, when you're in green and not in alert, your inspection time is much lower than a fleet that has an alert for ISS.
So just as a little bit of a more explanation on this, when you're looking at, when you get pulled over or a roadside inspector punches in your DOT number when they're in the scale house or the chicken coop or whatever you want to call it, they basically see a stoplight, which is red, yellow, green. Green is pass, yellow is optional, and red is inspect. And it's all based off of those basic scores that we talked about a little bit earlier here. And the big point of this is the more time you spend in green or pass, the less count of times that you're going to be inspected, which is going to basically, hopefully, cause you to get fewer gray hairs worrying about an inspection or something like that. But it's also not going to put you behind, and it's going to make things flow much more smoothly. So having and understanding your data, updating it, making sure that we're paying attention to that information and keeping ourselves in that kind of green pass area, it benefits in the long run when you're looking at the amount of time that you're going to spend being potentially being inspected.
And making sure that the drivers understand what their individual roadside inspections mean for the fleet as a whole is important as well. And speaking of violations, here we have, so what we did is for each of the 7 different basics that we have today, we broke up what are the top 5 violations for each of those, and then gave you the regulation code. If you could click the, thank you. So vehicle maintenance, I just want to point this out because if you look at these, inoperative required lamp, operating without inspection, fire extinguisher, flat tire, inoperative turn signals, all of those would fall into that new driver observable section. The driver should see these things. And then one more time. Looking at driver fitness, this makes sense for why we need to focus on these areas. Some of this work is going to be the back office, but yes, drivers as well. You know if you don't have your medical card in your possession. You know if your medical card is expired. Yes, you have the motor carrier and their loss control team to help you, their safety compliance team to help you, but you're all adults, you're all responsible folks. Let's pay attention and make sure that we're not getting more violations for the company and ourselves as well.
Right, and again, those vehicle maintenance violations that she's pointing out there, just to kind of stress on that a little bit more, the new CSA that they're coming out with, that they've got the preview for right now, the bulk of those are related to and assigned to the driver. Am I skipping ahead a slide here? I am, okay, I'm sorry.
Okay. Here we go.
Here we go.
So this is actually one of a motor carrier that we work with, and it's evidence of that driver observable. 84.1% of their vehicle maintenance violations are driver observable. So it makes sense that, again, the agency wants to start paying more attention to this piece. And then that's one of our maps where you can see exactly where their activity is happening.
Yeah, and again, the data sets that are available to the public don't have driver names or anything like that associated with them. But again, you can imagine on a roadside inspection, if that roadside inspector is seeing a lot of driver observable violations, that might be something that they're doing that now already. But again, the FMCSA acknowledging that we feel these violations are the responsibility of the driver. It's going to be very important that we pay attention to those kind of things as we move forward. Because again, there's going to be a drivable, observable category that's going to have its own scoring.
And for motor carriers in the room, one thing I'll remind you, if you get those roadside inspections, because the driver is required to turn those in within 24 hours of that inspection, or you need to notify the driver that they're supposed to turn those in. But on those roadside inspections, sometimes you'll see officer notes, but in the data, the officer detail is there. So it's kind of nice because we're able to show clients, hey, this is exactly what the inspector found. You were going 77 miles per hour in a 55 mile an hour zone. You were on minute 87 of a movie, et cetera, et cetera.
An actual violation description that we have found, just so you know. So this is just kind of a fun little slide here that talks about average violations per inspection. And those of us in here that are drivers or former drivers or have been on the road, some of this might not surprise us. We've got Texas is one of the big ones over there. We've got Arizona and a couple of other states there. Pam and I are actually from Wisconsin. Maybe you couldn't tell because through our accents. But regardless, the motor carrier industry in Wisconsin has a very good relationship with the division of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, Wisconsin Motor Carriers Association. But again, I was a little surprised that Wisconsin was so highly ranked on that. But again, you probably can look at this and see that you are understanding that maybe you felt this as you were driving through those states. That, oh yeah, I gotta be careful in Texas. They're pretty active down there. If they ring me up, it's gonna be rough. But again, interestingly, I was again surprised Illinois was, geez, they tend to like revenue. down, I'm just kidding, anybody here from Illinois? I'm just kidding. The Wisconsin-Illinois is a love-hate thing, Bears and Packers and so forth. But then again, it's just an interesting thing to be able to understand where we're seeing more of those violations per inspection as we look at it from a macro level. Additional information that we've got here, as we look at these, accidents and casualties, and then on the left side, or on the bottom side, we've got the years, and on the right side, the casualties per accident. Again, casualty is an injury or God forbid, a fatality or something like that. But as we can see here, is that the number of accidents and casualties, we're seeing that going up, but the casualties per accident is going down a little bit and it's starting to level off. So there's some interesting things that we can see out of this information based on the accidents and casualties, which are trickling up. Again, we mentioned 2013 is kind of green. So we have to, it's showing it's going down, might not be the case. Come back next year, we'll talk about that a little bit more.
And then I promised to talk about the CPDP program. That stands for Crash Preventability Determination Program. One of the best things in the world I think the FMCSA has done. Because, all my years, the agency has said a crash is a crash is a crash when we complain to them about, hey, you need to take into consideration. So we, you shouldn't talk so much.
I'm sorry.
So this is an existing program. It allows the motor carrier to go in and crashes that fit into one of the 16 categories today. They're proposing some changes to it, but it allows the motor carrier to say, hey, my driver wasn't at fault. As long as you have the police report, you have certain evidence, it's great. The system walks you through the process. It does a really nice job of it. I will tell you, it is such a popular program that there's a note right on the system that tells you the agency is about 90 days behind on getting answers out. But in talking to our fleets, it's really about 120 days. And then this is what I just wanted to break out. So I dug into the data, and one of the things that I saw is that fleets in that 1 to 49 range are about 18% of the time they've had they've been utilizing this system. The mid-size fleets, 50 to 500, are at 38%, and then the larger fleets over 500 power units are at 44%. So if you have a crash, whether you be the driver or the motor carrier, make sure that the motor carrier, if it's non-preventable, you've got the necessary documentation, get it submitted and into the agency for their consideration. It's going to help. It will still show up on your CSA record, but they take it and they move it out of they move it into a top section. The bottom section is what's used in the math for the CSA score for crashes. And then what I will tell you is whatever program you use or don't use, you should be, but there's data out there it needs to be paid attention to because everybody else is looking at the information as well. We've got the underwriters, we've got the loss control people, we've got your competitors that use it, we've got the shippers that are utilizing it, and of course, the biggest one is the attorneys are utilizing it as well.
So basically we're at the end here. We did have a couple of more slides. We want to be respectful of time. Pam and I will stick around here at the end. We've actually got a booth in the hall as well if you want to swing by and see us. But is there anything that we want to force you to go over time with on the rest of our slides?
No, just I see a question, so maybe not a question, maybe a stretch.
Well, what booth are you guys at?
13008.
13008.
All right, thanks. You're right, I talked too much. I'm sorry. Thank you, folks.